April 6, 1941. If you try to filter out all the noise of history, what sound remains? I think it's the sound of pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't necessarily the roar of tanks at first.
No, it was quieter, more sinister.
It was the sound of synchronization. 680,000 Axis soldiers crossing borders almost simultaneously, a terrifying, calculated thunderclap.
Before dawn even properly broke, the ground assault began. But you're right, the real terror, the message, arrived from the air.
Concentrated entirely on civilian centers.
Uh-huh. We are talking about an air assault of, well, almost cinematic horror, targeted immediately and overwhelmingly on the capital, Belgrade. Sources confirm 484 bombers and Stugas descending.
Just wave after wave.
Completely devastating the civilian population. It launched a campaign designed not just to occupy, but to utterly shatter two sovereign states, Yugoslavia and Greece.
So this isn't just another history deep dive for us. It really feels like a historical thriller. We're tracking this short, incredibly brutal, and profoundly consequential Balkan campaign.
Right. For many students of World War II, maybe it gets treated as a footnote, a sort of necessary mop-up operation on the way to Russia.
But the sources we've looked at make it crystal clear that this campaign dramatically altered the timeline of the entire war. And crucially, it laid the groundwork for years and years of brutal internal conflict afterwards.
The invasion itself, it was defined by its speed and its ruthlessness. The verdict delivered later at the Nuremberg trials was absolutely unambiguous.
What'd they say?
The invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece was categorized legally as an unlawful war of aggression, no question.
And the collapse was just stunningly swift. Yugoslavia capitulated on April 17th.
Greece held out only slightly longer, April 23rd. Mere weeks. Think about that. Weeks to completely dismantle the political and military structures of two entire nations.
18 days to crush Yugoslavia, essentially. So our mission today, really, is to figure out the how and the why. How did the Balkans, this region Hitler, initially wanted to keep perfectly calm, almost like a neutral staging ground? How did it become the stage for one of World War II's most destructive and, frankly, destabilizing campaigns?
Yeah, that's the core question. And the answer, I think, lies in the intense strategic stakes. Long before 1941, the Balkans were this incredibly complicated nexus of competing great power interests.
You had everyone involved, didn't you?
Everyone. The Soviet Union, Britain, Germany, Italy, all vying for access, for influence. But for Germany specifically, the stability of this region was absolutely critical. It was a precondition for Operation Barbarossa, the planned invasion of the Soviet Union.
Right. They needed the resources, things like oil, foodstuffs, and crucially, they absolutely needed to secure that southern flank. They couldn't afford British trouble popping up behind them when they pivoted east towards Russia.
Exactly. Which brings us directly to, let's call it Chapter 1, the powder keg of Europe, and maybe the single greatest destabilizing factor in that powder keg, Benito Mussolini.
Il Duce. His ambition wildly exceeded his military capability, didn't it?
Massively. Italian fascism had this grand vision, this idea of establishing its own spazio vitale, its living space.
Like Lebensraum, but Italian style.
Precisely. And it naturally involved dominating the Balkans, often trying to claim historical precedents, from the Roman Empire. But this ambition was a direct, really dangerous conflict with Berlin's strategic desire for calm in the region.
Hitler must have known this was trouble.
Oh, he explicitly warned Mussolini. Accounts confirm Hitler made it perfectly clear to the Italian foreign minister, Ciano, back in August 1940. The message was simple. Maintain Ruhe auf dem Balkan, calm in the Balkan. That was paramount.
And specifically?
Specifically, the directive was, do not attack Yugoslavia, keep things quiet there.
Advice that was spectacularly ignored, and not just regarding Yugoslavia, right?
Yeah, completely ignored. On October 28th, 1940, Italian forces launched their, frankly, ill-prepared attack on Greece. They moved across the border from Italian-occupied Albania, and crucially, did so without any consultation with Germany.
Just went ahead and did it.
Just did it. And this date, October 28th, it remains indelible in Greek history. It's celebrated today as Okshi Day, the day of no.
Because that was the answer.
That was the resolute answer given by the Greek Prime Minister, Ioannis Metaxas, when the Italians presented their ultimatum. A flat no.
And the military result for Italy?
Humiliation. Immediate and profound. Mussolini had planned for a lightning war, a swift blitzkrieg to maybe match Hitler's performance in France.
It didn't quite work out that way.
Not at all. Within days, the attack stalled completely. By early November, Greek forces had counterattacked fiercely. They pushed the Italians not just out of Greece, but deep back into the mountainous Corsica region of Albania.
Wow. So the psychological blow must have been huge.
Catastrophic for Axis prestige. It made the alliance look vulnerable, weak even. And worse, it directly exposed the German southern flank. This Italian blunder, this absolute miscalculation, is what forced Hitler's hand. It leads directly to the initiation of Operation Marita.
So Hitler had to intervene now. It wasn't just about propping up his failing ally anymore.
No, it was strategic necessity. He had to eliminate the opportunity this Italian failure offered the British.
Because the British wouldn't just sit by.
Precisely. By November 1940, Hitler had already ordered his military planners to prepare for a German attack through Bulgaria aimed at Greece. This was formalized as Visum Nur 20, Directive 20, Operation Marita.
And the British reaction?
They wasted absolutely no time exploiting the situation. They occupied Crete almost immediately after the Italian attack began. And by December 1940, Churchill was openly discussing the movement of British forces into the agency.
That British move into the agent. That must have set off alarm bells in Berlin. It's like a dagger pointed straight at the German economy, isn't it?
It absolutely was. Those potential British bases threatened the German critical Romanian oil fields at Ploiești. Hitler could maybe tolerate a weak ally embarrassing him, but he absolutely could not tolerate his vital energy supply being exposed to British air attack. Not right before his largest planned offensive ever, Barbarossa.
So the stakes were suddenly dramatically raised.
Hugely. Which brings us to Yugoslavia's fatal flirtation with the Axis. Hitler had actually been trying to neutralize them through diplomacy.
Just keep them quiet, keep them neutral.
Yeah, hoping to secure their neutral stance, or better yet, simply bring them into the tripartite pact peacefully. Get them on side without firing a shot.
And for a moment, it looked like it worked.
A very brief moment. On March 25th, 1941, the Yugoslav government, under Regent Prince Paul, formally signed the pact in Vienna. Job done, seemed like.
But the stability of that agreement lasted. How long?
Barely 48 hours.
Wow. That's where the political tinderbox really ignites then.
Absolutely. On March 27th, 1941, massive anti-German demonstrations exploded across Yugoslavia, particularly in the Serbian regions. It was a mix of nationalist anger, religious opposition,
and military dissatisfaction.
Yes, army officers, backed by this popular and religious dissent, staged a lightning coup. They ousted the existing regency government. They put the 17-year-old King Peter II on the throne, and they immediately declared the tripartite pact invalid. Void.
How did Hitler take that?
The key detail here is his immediate white-hot fury. This coup was perceived not just as a diplomatic failure, which it was, but as a massive act of betrayal, a dangerous, destabilizing factor right on the border of the planned Barbarossa staging areas in Romania and Hungary.
Did he have a plan for this?
No. Sources confirm he had absolutely no prior military plan for this scenario. His reaction was immediate, impulsive. He ordered the military and the state of Yugoslavia to be, and I quote, smashed in a lightning campaign. That became Visum Nur 25.
It's really important, isn't it, to understand the tonal difference here. Directive 20, Marita, was a planned intervention in Greece driven by strategy. Directive 25 for Yugoslavia feels different.
Oh, completely different. This wasn't primarily a strategic necessity like securing the flank from the British via Greece. This was an emotional reaction. It was driven by perceived insult, by rage.
The order wasn't just to subdue Yugoslavia.
No, the order was to eliminate Yugoslavia as a state entity, to wipe it off the map. And to ensure the quick movement of forces needed for this punitive strike, Hitler immediately began dangling rewards to surrounding nations.
Like Hungary.
He tempted Hungary specifically, promised them the recovery of territories they'd lost after World War I under the Treaty of Trianon. He even offered the prospect of annexing Croatia if they'd join the invasion.
What was the reaction in Hungary to this offer?
It created a huge moral crisis. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Paul Teleki, was a man of principle. He had actually signed a treaty of eternal friendship with Yugoslavia just months earlier in December 1940.
So he was caught.
Utterly caught. The pressure to join the invasion, betraying that treaty, was immense. On April 3rd, just days before the attack, Teleki committed suicide.
Good heavens.
His suicide note expressed his shame and despair over Hungary being forced onto the side of scoundrels against a nation they'd pledged friendship to. It paints this incredibly vivid picture of the moral gravity and the intense political pressure involved in being drawn into Hitler's punitive action.
And amidst all this rapid political collapse, this betrayal, there was one final, almost desperate diplomatic scramble, wasn't there?
Yes, just one day before the German invasion on April 5th, the new Yugoslav government managed to sign a friendship and non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union.
A last-minute attempt to deter Hitler.
A gesture of defiance, perhaps, or a desperate hope. But it was instantly rendered obsolete. A signature on paper meant absolutely nothing when faced with 33 German divisions poised on the border. The die was well and truly cast.
Which brings us right to the moment of impact. The clock ticks down to April 6th, 05:15 a.m. We jump into Chapter 2. Operation Marita begins, and the Blitzkrieg is unleashed. And this was, as you said, a war of aggression in its purest form.
No declaration, no ultimatum delivered beforehand, not even a pretense, just overwhelming force, launched simultaneously.
The sheer concentration of force is staggering to think about.
It really is. 33 German divisions, 6 of them light panzer divisions, totaling 680,000 soldiers. They launched a simultaneous attack across the entire front line, hitting both Yugoslavia and Greece at the same time.
And it began with that air terror we mentioned.
Yes, the air terror set the tone for the whole campaign. The first devastating wave saw those 484 bombers and Stukas initiating the war with the attack on Belgrade. The damage was described in reports using the German word verheerend.
Devastating.
Truly devastating. It was aimed at the civilian population, government buildings. It was catastrophic and completely undermined the Yugoslav leadership structure before the ground war could even properly get going.
And what really highlights the sheer futility of resistance is when you look at the forces comparison.
It's stark. The Axis deployed a total of 11,153 German aircraft, plus another 320 Italian planes.
And the Yugoslav response in the air.
Sadly, almost purely symbolic. We know of 2 Yugoslav Bristol Blenheim bombers that managed to get through. They dropped a few bombs on some supply facilities near Graz in Austria. Minor damage, 1 reported fatality. It was a brave but token gesture against overwhelming strategic power.
Let's lay out the full force disparity on the ground as well. You had those 33 German divisions.
Plus 3 massive Italian armies, totaling 38 divisions, though their quality was, shall we say, variable. Add 10 Hungarian brigades joining in from the north, and Bulgarian support troops facilitating the German advance.
And arrayed against that colossal force.
The defenders were just hopelessly outmatched. Yugoslavia could theoretically field 32 divisions, Greece 21, but many Yugoslav divisions barely existed or melted away quickly. Allied support was minimal on the ground.
What did the British send?
Just 2 British infantry divisions, 1 panzer brigade, which sounds good, but was under-equipped, and that tiny contingent of 7 RAF squadrons. Only 84 aircraft in total. The speed of the collapse was practically predetermined by these numbers alone.
So the Yugoslav collapse, running from April 6th to the 17th, it wasn't just a military defeat, was it? It sounds more like a societal implosion.
That's a good way to put it. The German advance was a highly coordinated 3-pronged strike. You had the 12th Army advancing from Bulgaria straight towards Thessaloniki in Greece, aiming to cut Greece off from Yugoslavia.
And the other prongs.
Meanwhile, the German 2nd Army and Panzer Group 1 drove rapidly south and east from Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, aiming directly into the heart of Yugoslavia.
And the country was already fragmenting politically as the German forces moved in. That seems key to their swift success.
Absolutely critical. On April 10th, while German forces were literally occupying Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, the extreme nationalist Ustaša movement immediately proclaimed the so-called independent state of Croatia.
A puppet state, effectively.
A puppet state, instantly recognized by Germany and Italy. This internal fragmentation just destroyed the Yugoslav defense from within. Croatian and Slovenian units within the Royal Yugoslav Army largely refused to fight for the central government in Belgrade. Many deserted en masse.
Crippling the army.
Totally crippling it. Within a week of the invasion starting, Belgrade itself fell on April 12th. It was taken by Panzer Group 1, which had executed this brutal, rapid drive from the east, coming up from Bulgaria.
Just 5 days later, April 17th, it was over for Yugoslavia.
General Danilo Kalafatomic signed the conditional surrender. The government and the young King Peter II had already fled the country, eventually ending up in exile.
And the aftermath was this brutal, cynical partition you mentioned. Yugoslavia was literally carved into 10 pieces.
each under different administration, designed to maximize Axis control and exploitation. The newly formed independent state of Croatia, under the thumb of the fascist Ustasha, received a huge swath of territory: Livonia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and most of the Dalmatian coast. A vast, multi-ethnic territory ripe for the Ustasha's horrific violence.
And Serbia, the heartland of the resistance to the pact.
Serbia, the center of the previous resistance and the coup, was punished severely. It was reduced dramatically to its pre-Balkan War borders of 1912 and placed under direct German military administration. It was designated as an exclusively German sphere of influence, ripe for exploitation.
And the treatment of the captured Yugoslav armed forces. You said it immediately underlined the horrific ethnic dimension of this campaign. This seems incredibly important for understanding what came next.
It's absolutely a crucial inflection point, setting the stage for the civil war that would erupt under occupation. The Axis powers handled the approximately 430,000 captured soldiers of the Royal Yugoslav Army, based entirely on ethnicity.
How did that work?
All Croatian, Slovenian, Bosnian, Muslim, Hungarian, and Macedonian soldiers, which accounted for roughly half of the entire army, were immediately freed and sent home. They were deemed, acceptable populations for the new Axis puppet states or annexed territories.
But the others, the Serbs and Montenegrins.
The remaining approximately 180,000 Serbs and Montenegrins were immediately classified as prisoners of war. They were rounded up and deported en masse to forced labor camps inside Germany.
So ethnic discrimination baked directly into the surrender term.
Exactly. It sent a chilling signal to the various ethnic groups across the former Yugoslavia about exactly where they stood in the new Axis order. It fanned the flames of resentment and fear from day one.
With Yugoslavia now crushed, fragmented, and destabilized internally, the German military focus immediately shifted south to finish the job in Greece. This leads us into Chapter 3, the Greek tragedy, a story that seems to blend desperate defiance, utter political chaos, and finally, a frantic Allied evacuation.
That's right. The German 12th Army, already staged in Bulgaria for Operation Marita, had illegally crossed the Greek border at dawn on April 6th, same time as the attack on Yugoslavia began.
And the ultimatum.
The German envoy in Athens, von Eisenlohr actually, delivered the ultimatum after the invasion was already underway. A clear violation of international law, again. Prime Minister Karadzic' refusal of the German demands was immediate and defiant. Ochi again, essentially.
The initial fighting centered on breaching the Greek border defenses, didn't it? The famous Metaxas line.
Yes, a chain of concrete fortifications and tunnels built along the mountainous Greek-Bulgarian border, specifically designed to repel an invasion from Bulgaria, ironically using some German engineering advice from before the war.
How did the Germans tackle it?
They poured resources into the breach. The elite German 8th Mountain Corps spearheaded the assault, heavily supported by relentless dive bombing from Stukas. They eventually achieved the breakthrough on April 9th, after 3 days of really fierce fighting.
Particularly at places like Fort Rupel.
Exactly. Fort Rupel in the Strymon Valley saw incredibly tough resistance. Sources indicate the Greek defenders there inflicted significant casualties, suffering relatively few themselves, maybe 44 Greek casualties versus over 300 German dead and wounded. But the sheer weight of the German assault, especially the air power, meant the line eventually fell.
And the consequences of that breach.
Thessaloniki, Greece's second city, was occupied almost immediately, and the entire Greek Second Army, which was defending that sector, was now cut off and isolated. It capitulated swiftly.
Despite the rapid collapse of those border defenses, the fight for the Greek mainland continued, right? The Allies were there.
Yes. The Allied forces, mainly the British, Australian, and New Zealand troops under General Maitland Wilson, tried desperately to establish a coherent defense line further south, along the Aliakmonis River.
But the German operational tempo was just too fast.
Way too fast. German tanks, particularly from the SS Adolf Hitler Division, raced through North Macedonia, taking Skopje and Prilep. They then hit the Allied lines hard on the western flank, punching through the Klidi Pass.
Forcing another retreat.
It forced General Wilson to recognize the position was becoming untenable. On April 16th, he ordered a full retreat further south, aiming to establish a new, perhaps final, defense line at the historic pass of Thermopylae.
Meanwhile, what happened to the main Greek army? The one that had been successfully fighting the Italians in Albania?
That's another tragedy within the tragedy. The Greek First Army, which had performed brilliantly against the Italians on the Epirus front, was trying to race south to disengage and join the Allied defense line. But they were disastrously cut off by fast-moving Wehrmacht units at the Katara Pass near Metsovo.
Encircled.
Completely encircled, leading to their total collapse and surrender. It was a devastating blow to Greek morale.
This rapid military deterioration must have sparked chaos in Athens.
An acute political crisis. On April 18th, King George II and Prime Minister Chrysis held this incredibly tense crisis meeting. They argued fiercely over whether the government should flee, whether to continue the fight. It was heated and ultimately inconclusive.
And later that evening,
Chrysis allegedly committed suicide in his house.
let's just pause on this again, because this detail, the alleged suicide, it speaks volumes about the atmosphere of desperation, perhaps suspicion, certainly chaos in Athens at that moment.
It really does. The official account that was released stating that he shot himself twice in the head and critically with his left hand, despite being known to be right-handed well, it immediately raised public doubt. Whispers started instantly.
Murder. Politically engineered suicide.
We'll likely never know for sure. The point is, the head of government was suddenly gone under very suspicious circumstances. No official investigation ever followed in the chaos. This political instability just accelerated the military surrender that was already unfolding.
Which brings us to this truly bizarre sequence you call the triple capitulation. What happened there?
It's almost farcical if it weren't so tragic. On April 20th, General Georgios Tsoulokoglou, who was commanding the remnants of the encircled Greek forces in Epirus, acted entirely without authorization from the Greek High Command. In fact, he acted against explicit orders not to surrender.
What did he do?
He presented a unilateral surrender directly to the commander of the SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, SS Obergruppenführer Josef Sepp Dietrich. Tsoulokoglou apparently wanted to surrender only to the Germans, partly out of respect for their fighting ability, but also pointedly to deny the Italians any sense of victory or glory after their earlier humiliation.
Which predictably must have enraged Mussolini.
Oh, absolutely furious. Italy felt completely slighted. They protested vociferously to Hitler, demanding recognition for their prior losses and their role, however minimal, in the final campaign.
So Hitler intervened.
Hitler ordered a redo. Tsoulokoglou was immediately forced to sign a second surrender protocol, this time in Ioannina, the very next day, April 21st. And this time, Italian officers were present.
Problem solved.
Not quite, because the original German field commander, Field Marshal List, hadn't been present for that second signing in Ioannina. So, for protocol's sake, Tsoulokoglou had to endure the humiliation of signing a third, formal, unconditional surrender document in Thessaloniki on April 23rd. This one finally included all the appropriate German and Italian representatives.
Wow. A surrender to the SS, a second one to appease the Italians, and a third official one. It really does underscore the fragmented command, the political infighting, even among the victorious Axis partners themselves.
Absolutely. And on that same day, April 23rd, King George II and his remaining government ministers finally fled Athens, sailing for the island of Crete.
So with the Greek mainland effectively lost, the priority for the British switched entirely to getting their own men out.
Exactly. The evacuation of the Allied troops, codenamed Operation Demon, began around April 21st. And it had to be executed under relentless German air and ground pressure. The Luftwaffe had total air superiority by this point.
But the Allied rearguard performed well.
Brilliantly, actually, especially the ANZC troops. They fought a series of sharp, delaying actions. They abandoned the Thermopylae defensive line on April 24th, but only after holding the Germans back just long enough for the evacuation ships to start loading further south.
And the evacuation itself, Operation Demon.
By the end of the month, April 30th, the Royal Navy had managed a significant achievement under fire. They evacuated roughly 50,000 Allied troops, mostly to Crete initially, and then onwards to Egypt.
But there was a huge downside.
A massive downside. They had to leave behind virtually all of their heavy equipment. Tanks, artillery, vehicles, vast amounts of supplies. It was a major blow to Allied military capacity in the entire Mediterranean theater at a critical time.
Which brings us directly then to Chapter 4, the last stand on Crete. This relatively small island suddenly held immense strategic value, didn't it?
Absolutely pivotal at this moment.
Why was Crete so essential, beyond just being a temporary safe haven for the evacuated troops?
It comes down to geography and, believe it or not, oil again. Crete's location allowed the British to effectively control access to the Aegean Sea, but crucially, it provided a potential base from which RAF medium-range bombers could operate.
And their target?
If the British held Crete, they could theoretically strike directly at those all-important German-controlled Romanian oil fields at Ploiești, the fields that the entire Barbarossa operation depended upon. Hitler simply could not tolerate that potential threat hanging over his eastern invasion.
So Crete had to be taken, and the answer was the famous, or perhaps infamous, airborne invasion, Operation Mercury, starting May 20th, 1941.
The first major airborne invasion in history. It ultimately succeeded in capturing the island, but it came at a terrible, almost prohibitive price for the Germans.
How so?
Operation Mercury utilized massive numbers of elite German paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, but they faced incredibly fierce resistance, not just from the remaining Allied forces, the British, Anzacs, and Greek soldiers evacuated from the mainland, but critically, from the local Cretan civilian population who spontaneously rose up and fought alongside them, often with just knives and old rifles.
So the invasion succeeded, but the cost?
The invasion was achieved, but only after suffering what German reports called relatively high losses. Losses so high, particularly among the irreplaceable paratroopers and their transport aircraft, that Hitler was deeply shaken. He famously never again authorized a mass airborne invasion on that scale for the rest of the war.
That fierce local resistance, particularly the actions of the civilian partisans, led almost immediately to a horrific German response, didn't it?
Yes. A policy of brutal collective punishment. German General Kurt Student, the commander of the airborne operation, was enraged by the losses and the civilian participation. He issued immediate orders for reprisals against the Cretan population in response to these partisan attacks.
What form did these reprisals take?
Mass executions. Villages were burned. Hostages were shot. Greek estimates, which are widely accepted, tragically indicate that around 2,000 Cretan civilians were summarily executed by German forces during and immediately after the battle as part of these reprisal actions. Places like Kandamari became infamous.
And what's particularly disturbing, looking back, is the legal aftermath, or lack thereof, for this brutality.
It's quite shocking. After the war, the Greek government formally requested the extradition of General Kurt Student to face trial in Greece as a war criminal, specifically for these atrocities against Cretan civilians.
And the request was denied.
It was denied by the British, who held him. Student was tried, but only by a British military court, and only for specific war crimes committed against British troops during the Crete campaign, like misuse of prisoners. He received a surprisingly short sentence and was released in 1948. He never faced justice for the massacres of civilians.
Meanwhile, what happened to the main Greek army? The soldiers left on the mainland after the capitulation.
It effectively dissolved. While initially, around 210,000 Greek soldiers were captured and the entire 430,000-man army was technically declared POWs by the Germans.
They weren't all shipped off like the Serbs.
No. In Greece, the policy was different. The vast majority of Greek soldiers were disarmed and simply released home after a relatively short period. The Germans seemed more interested in quickly pacifying the country than in holding hundreds of thousands of Greek POWs indefinitely.
But not all Greek soldiers just went home.
No, crucially, about 20,000 highly motivated Greek Royal Army troops managed to escape the mainland or Crete. They made their way, often arduously, to Egypt. There, they formed the nucleus of the new Free Greek forces, fighting alongside the Allies for the rest of the war. They later distinguished themselves in North Africa, notably at the Battle of El Alamein.
We've traced the fighting, the collapse, the evacuation, the final stand on Crete. Now, we absolutely must address Chapter 5, the consequences and the delay. This was, as we've said, a short military campaign, but its fallout was immensely long-lasting and really defined the nature of the Axis occupation in the Balkans.
The first major consequence, mirroring the carve-up of Yugoslavia, was the brutal and complicated partition of Greece itself. Hitler, again, was primarily concerned with strategic control, not necessarily acquiring territory for Germany itself. This meant the occupation was divided among the Axis partners.
So, who got what in Greece? Italy must have been pleased.
Italy got the lion's share, territorially. They occupied Athens, the strategically important Ionian Islands, the Cyclades Islands in the Aegean, and most of the Greek mainland. They essentially gained the territorial preeminence in Greece they had craved since their failed invasion in 1940.
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria annexed territories they had long desired, East Macedonia and West Thrace. This finally gave Bulgaria that coveted sovereign access to the Aegean Sea, a major national goal.
So what did Germany keep for itself?
Germany, thinking purely strategically, took only the absolutely vital areas. They occupied Thessaloniki and its crucial Macedonian hinterland, the major industrial port of Piraeus near Athens, and key Aegean islands like Lemnos, Lesbos, and Chios.
Why those islands specifically?
They were essential for controlling the sea lanes into the Black Sea and, critically, for monitoring the neutral but watchful Turkish border area. And of course, King George II and the Greek government were now in English exile, trying to represent free Greece from abroad.
But the real brutality of the occupation, beyond the initial fighting and reprisals, came through economic means, didn't it? Leading directly to the Long War, the birth of powerful partisan resistance movements.
Absolutely. The occupation immediately led to a catastrophic hunger winter in 1941-42, particularly devastating in the major urban centers like Athens and Thessaloniki. It was a perfect storm of factors.
What caused it?
The Greek economic infrastructure had essentially collapsed during the invasion. The British, understandably, maintained a naval blockade of Axis-occupied Europe, which included Greece. And on top of that, the Axis occupiers implemented what contemporary sources consistently call unprecedented exploitation.
What did that exploitation look like on the ground?
It involved massive requisitioning of food stocks, raw materials, anything of value, primarily by the Germans and Italians, to support their own war effort. This was compounded by crushing financial demands, so-called occupation costs, levied on the nearly bankrupt Greek puppet state.
How high were these costs?
These costs, coupled with other state expenditures forced by the occupiers, soared to an unbelievable 90% of Greece's real national income in 1942. Think about that level of systematic theft from an entire economy.
The result must have been economic meltdown.
Total meltdown, astronomical hyperinflation, which just devastated the civilian population. Look at this one detail. The price of a single British sovereign gold coin, often used as a benchmark for storing wealth, rose from about 1,087 drachmas just before the invasion to an astounding 70.8 trillion drachmas by November 1944. Money became utterly worthless.
Forcing people into what? Bartering? Starvation?
Both. Bartering for scraps and mass starvation, particularly in the cities where food couldn't be grown.
And the initial Axis response to this unfolding humanitarian disaster?
Chillingly indifferent, especially from the top. We have that infamous quote attributed to Hermann Goering, who, when informed of the unfolding famine in Greece, reportedly dismissed it, saying something like, "We cannot care about the starving Greeks. This is a misfortune that will affect many other peoples anyway."
Just utter callousness.
Tens, possibly hundreds of thousands died from malnutrition and related diseases, especially children in Athens and Piraeus. Ultimately, the Axis powers were forced to act, but it wasn't primarily out of humanitarian concern.
Why did they act then?
They began to fear that the complete economic collapse and the rampant starvation would lead to widespread diseases that could potentially affect their own occupation troops. They also worried it would erode troop morale completely, seeing the suffering around them, and further fuel resistance.
So they grudgingly permitted some humanitarian relief.
Yes. Under the careful supervision of the International Red Cross, led by dedicated figures like the Swiss delegate René Burkhardt, negotiations took place. Eventually, the British agreed to partially relax the naval blockade for specific relief shipments,
allowing food in.
This allowed vital shipments of Canadian and U.S. wheat to be delivered on neutral Swedish ships. It did mitigate the worst of the disaster from mid-1942 onwards, but only after mass death had already occurred. The scars of the Great Famine ran incredibly deep.
And that exploitation, that suffering, it directly fueled the resistance movements, didn't it? The short military campaign immediately led to prolonged, bloody partisan warfare in both occupied Yugoslavia and Greece, a conflict that lasted until the very end of the war and, in Greece's case, morphed straight into a civil war.
Exactly. In Greece, the communist-led Popular Liberation Front, known by its acronym EAM, was established relatively soon after the occupation began. It skillfully leveraged the widespread desperation caused by the famine and the hatred of the occupiers.
And it gained massive support.
Huge popular support. Estimates suggest EAM had somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million members or active sympathizers at its peak in a country of only about 7 million. By 1942, they formed a powerful military wing, the Greek People's Liberation Army, or ELS.
And ELS wasn't just a small guerrilla band.
Oh, no. By 1944, ELS was estimated to field up to 120,000 armed fighters. They effectively controlled large swaths of the mountainous Greek countryside, tying down significant numbers of German and Italian troops who were desperately needed elsewhere, especially on the Eastern Front. This powerful resistance force was the massive long-term price Germany paid for Hitler's quick victory in April 41.
The short campaign resulted in arguably the longest, bloodiest occupation struggle in Southeast Europe.
Without a doubt.
Okay, we absolutely must now circle back to perhaps the most enduring historical debate that stems directly from this Balkan campaign. The infamous 6-week delay.
Ah, yes. The necessary diversion of German troops, particularly mobile panzer divisions and crucial air power, for this unexpected Balkan campaign did delay the planned start date of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union.
By how much?
The conventional figure usually cited and debated is about 5 to 6 weeks. The original target date was mid-May 1941. The actual invasion launched on June 22nd.
Which immediately gave rise to that grand historical counterfactual. Did that specific delay caused by the Balkan diversion cost Germany the chance to capture Moscow before the brutal Russian winter set in during late 1941?
Right.
And by extension, did the Balkan campaign cost Hitler the entire war?
It's a compelling narrative, and one that was popular for a long time, sometimes even promoted by former German generals after the war to explain away their failure.
But connecting the dots from more modern historical analysis?
The consensus among most serious historians today largely rejects the idea that the Balkan delay was the primary or singular decisive cause of the failure at Moscow. The reality, as always, is much more complex.
What other factors were more critical?
Historians like Anthony Beevor, Richard Evans, John Keegan, they point to two other crucial, arguably more fundamental factors that likely doomed the 1941 offensive, regardless of those 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the unforeseen or perhaps underestimated persistent strength and sheer resilience of Soviet resistance, combined with catastrophic German logistical problems. They simply couldn't sustain their advance.
The famous logistical nightmare in Russia.
Exactly. Specifically, the different railway gauge, the narrower Russian tracks meant supplies couldn't be transported quickly enough to the front lines. The panzer divisions literally outran their fuel and ammunition supplies time and time again. That was happening before winter truly hit.
And the second major factor, besides logistics and Soviet resistance?
The weather. But critically, not the winter itself initially. It was the mud. The Respitiza.
The spring mud season.
Yes, the heavy Russian spring mud season. And meteorological records show it was unusually severe and prolonged in 1941. Many analysts argue convincingly that even if the German forces had been ready in mid-May, the sheer impassability of the roads due to the deep mud would likely have prevented a coherent, full-scale start to Barbarossa much before the actual June launch date anyway.
So the Balkan delay might have cost them some preparation time, maybe affected morale.
Absolutely. It definitely played a role. It cost the German high command valuable time for final preparations, redeployments, and maybe contributed to the erosion of that early German overconfidence. But was it the reason they failed to take Moscow? Probably not the main one. The deeper underlying issues were the fierce Soviet fightback and Germany's own logistical overreach.
Ultimately, though, the final judgment on this entire aggressive military action was rendered clearly at Nuremberg.
Yes. The war against both Yugoslavia and Greece, launched without declaration, based on flimsy pretexts or pure punitive rage, was officially recognized by the International Military Tribunal at the Nuremberg trials as a clear German war of aggression, legally unambiguous.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to understand this often overlooked theater of war? We've traced this explosive geopolitical collision, Mussolini's monumental hubris setting it off, the quick, defiant Yugoslavian coup escalating it, and then Hitler's impulsive, punitive military response, resulting in this incredibly rapid, brutal victory across the Balkans.
The real knowledge nugget here, I think, is the stark contrast. While the entire military campaign succeeded, brilliantly in German terms, in shattering 2 sovereign states in less than 3 weeks, it simultaneously established the framework for years of incredibly brutal occupation, catastrophic economic exploitation, and ultimately, a massive, entrenched partisan conflict.
The short war laid the groundwork for a very, very long and bloody aftermath. An aftermath that fundamentally changed the social and political map of Southeast Europe forever.
And we spent some time earlier detailing that very specific Axis policy towards the captured Yugoslav soldiers, differentiating their treatment based entirely on ethnicity, releasing Croatians, Slovenians, Macedonians, Bosnian Muslims, but deporting 180,000 Serbs and Montenegrins to forced labor camps in Germany?
Which raises, I think, a really important final question for you to maybe mull over as you continue your own deep dive into this incredibly complex period. Considering the widespread ethnic violence and the discriminatory policies that were immediately implemented by the occupiers and their collaborators, particularly the Ustaša and Croatia, and given that initial German policy of ethnic discrimination right there at the moment of surrender, how deeply did these early actions shape the intensity, the brutality, and the specific nature of the multi-sided civil wars and inter-ethnic conflicts that would then erupt and define the Balkans for decades, long after the German military finally left?
That long-term legacy of April 1941, the seeds sown in those few weeks, something to really think about.